Yabloko was officially banned in Russia today, and Yabloko was not allowed to participate in the parliamentary elections.
The Yabloko party considers the war with Ukraine to be the gravest crime. Every citizen of Russia bears their share of responsibility for what is happening to the country, and for this war as well.
Today in Russia, the first protests in many years against the war in Ukraine have begun. And the protesters called the war against Ukraine a mistake and even a huge crime by Russia.
Shame! Shame! Yabloko! Yabloko!
Thank you.
And if you already thought that a rebellion suddenly started in Russia, you're mistaken. It's just Kremlin political operatives entertaining themselves and pretending that there's supposedly democracy in Russia. Today, on August 10, the Supreme Court of Russia was considering a lawsuit to remove the Yabloko party from the Duma elections. The only registered party on the ballot that openly opposes the war. And as a result, today the Supreme Court of the Russian Federation banned the Yabloko party from participating in the parliamentary elections, which will take place in September. And as a result, the Yabloko party is being removed from the ballots. This is what democracy looks like in Russia. And the official reason for all this, you won't believe it, copyright infringement. Where? In Russia. And whose copyright exactly was violated? Even the plaintiffs themselves couldn't figure it out, not to mention the prosecutors and judges. But they still made a decision that the party should be banned and can't participate in the elections because you see, in Russia the party violates copyright. A small group of Russians gathered outside the courthouse today to protest, carefully writing on little pieces of paper that they don't need a little takmachka and that the war needs to end. Let's break down in this episode how this circus with the Yabloko party works, a parody of war opponents and the banning of a party for words. May there always be sunshine. Well, because it's impossible to call all of this anything other than a circus. My name is Alexei Pechi. Let's discuss this topic together. I'll say right away that I'll be a bit biased on this topic, and we'll talk about what the Yabloko party is, why it was needed, and why its outcome was absolutely predictable. But before we start, I ask you to subscribe to this channel, like this episode, and leave any comment you want. Right under this video, let me know what you think about Yabloko and about the fact that Russia decided to play at democracy and the Kremlin decided to show that supposedly democracy exists in Russia.
Yabloko!
Yabloko!
Yabloko! Subtitles provided by Simon.
And if he's there, then give it.
The war with Ukraine is a fratricidal war. This is not self-defense, because no one is attacking Russia or violating its sovereign borders. You can't win in this war, and you can't lose in it either. Besides ruined lives, the war will bring extremely severe consequences for the Russian economy.
Blood! We got blood, so...
Let's go through everything step by step. In these shots you can see representatives and supporters of the Russian anti-war party Yabloko who openly spoke out against the war in Ukraine. The party was even registered, the Kremlin played around with this party a little, and now has decided to simply remove it from the election and strike it from the ballots through the Supreme Court. Well, as they say, they've had their fun and that's enough. But in reality, the Yabloko party did its job perfectly. To get ahead of myself, I'll say that this party helped the Kremlin identify those who are truly, genuinely against the war, but more on that a bit later. Let's start with the lawsuit itself, which was filed in the Supreme Court today, because every line of it is worthy of its own joke. The pro-Kremlin party Rodina filed the lawsuit against the Yabloko party back on August 7. The claims against the Yabloko party were presented in court by Rodina's lawyer, Alexei Novoselov, remember this name, and the list of violations there is simply extravagant. According to the plaintiff, Yabloko illegally used a photograph of the aftermath of the atomic bombing of Hiroshima on its website. Well, like, you can't publish it without the permission of the author of this photograph, and who the author is, again, I'll say, is unknown. But the plaintiff also stated that the Yabloko party used quotes from the Soviet song May There Always Be Sunshine, which were mentioned in an interview with the party's founder, Grigory Yavlinsky. He says in it somewhere, May there always be sunshine. And, like, you can't use this phrase without the permission of the copyright holder. And Yabloko also used the phrase, as long as there is no war. And now the Rodina party associates this phrase with Alexander Volodin's play Five Volodikov. And Yabloko also used edited photos of the deputy chairman of the Security Council of the Russian Federation, Russia's chief drunk Dmitry Medvedev, and the blogger Victoria Bonya. And also, you won't believe it, but the Yabloko party used an image in 2026 generated by ChatGPT. You can't do that. And they used footage from Sergei Bondarchuk's film War and Peace. And the party's logo itself, according to the plaintiffs, was allegedly borrowed from a 1920 poster by Soviet artist El Lisitsky called Beat the Whites with the Red Wedge. And this is where the real circus begins. This isn't just a joke, it's actually some kind of entertainment program with completely crazy people. I don't know if you could imagine what a circus in a madhouse looks like. This is it. This is about what it would be like. When a representative of the Rodina party was asked in court, whose rights exactly are violated by the photos of Hiroshima? Well, the dialogue turned out to be amusing. Again, jumping ahead, I'll say that despite this amusing exchange, the judge still decided that the Yabloko party should be removed from the ballots. This is just complete idiocy, and the dialogue went as follows. That very same Novosholov from the Rodina party stated, and I quote, Yabloko used a photo of the aftermath of the atomic bombing of Hiroshima by the United States of America in violation of copyright. The judge asks him, and who is the author of this photo, Novosholov? We don't know. Someone from the US Army. That's just inspiring. Think about it. A party is being removed from the elections in the country for violating the copyright of an unidentified serviceman of the United States Army, who took the photograph more than 80 years ago. Well, this is some kind of circus. You know, on one hand it's funny, but on the other hand I realize that unfortunately such idiots live on the same planet as I do. 140 million such fools really live nearby. Let's move on. The situation with ChatGPT is even funnier. So the Rodina party claimed that images generated by the neural network, which the Yabloko party used, violate the rights of those people whose photos were used to train the neural network. That is, if you follow this logic, then this is a lawsuit against the company OpenAI. Well, but for some reason it's coming from Russia, from a Russian opposition party. Well, you know, I was looking at all this and I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that right next to us. There lives a nation of about 140 million people, or however many there are, who are just so foolish. Just imagine they're simply being mocked, and the Russian herd applauds, saying, well, Volodya Putin, good job. Imagine they're being told, let's ban the party because it used photographs, including one of Hiroshima. And when they ask, whose photograph is it? They're like, who the hell knows whose it is? What difference does it make anyway? Judge, why are you asking these questions? That's not the point. Vova Putin said to disband the party, so we're disbanding it. Even funnier, that the copyright holders themselves say they have no complaints. The grandson of the author of the lyrics to Let There Always Be Sunshine, Gleb Ashanin, directly stated that he has no complaints against the Yabloko party. And he does not authorize anyone, he did not authorize anyone to represent his interests in this lawsuit. The son of composer Arkady Ostrovsky, who wrote the music for the same song, had previously publicly allowed the Yabloko party to use it. So, no one actually asked for the copyright, which the pro-Kremlin Rodina party is so concerned about, to be protected, but you understand that this is just an excuse to somehow start a lawsuit. Well, they just needed something to latch onto. Basically, with the same success, we could have said, listen, he has a receding hairline that's too big here. You know, maybe he's trying to mock Vladimir Putin. Let's ban it. And I'm sure that the Supreme Court of Russia would have banned the party. Well, as a result, against this background, both the Central Election Commission of Unwashed Russia and the Prosecutor General's office voted to remove Yabloko. In the end, the judge ruled that yes, the party should be removed from the list. A representative of the Central Election Commission stated directly in the Supreme Court that a violation during campaigning is a sufficient reason to remove a party. What violations, of course, no one specified. Rosfin monitoring found people in Yabloko's federal list who allegedly received foreign funding even before the start of the election year. That is, the entire state apparatus got involved. The court, the Central Election Commission, the prosecutor's office, financial intelligence, everyone is against the party that, let me remind you, in the last elections barely managed to get a measly couple percent there. And now for the most interesting and funniest part. I ask you to treat this episode exactly like a joke, because there is no opposition. There is no political opposition in Russia. Well, it's just a circus. I'll explain why now, since everything is so predictably staged. Why was the Yabloko party even allowed on the ballot literally on July 29? Have you ever asked yourself why? Well, I mean, it was obvious that the party would be removed. They would find some crazy reason to get it disqualified from the elections in court. The question is, why register it at all then? I mean, they could have just not allowed it from the start. Moreover, the decision of the Central Election Commission was unanimous. The list included 269 candidates plus another 135 in single-member districts. In short, this party still wouldn't have been allowed into the State Duma. So why register them at all? The first version, the most conspiratorial one, goes like this. So the security forces in Russia decided to break the scheme that the foreign policy curator Sergei Kirienko was building. Well, it's like the security forces are just messing around for fun. And as you know, there really is a conflict between this political wing and the security wing, and this Kirienko launched his own party there, which started to gain some popularity. And the security forces don't like that the political wing in Putin's inner circle is gaining more power than the security wing. The second version is the exact opposite. Yabloko was registered according to the plan of Putin's own presidential administration, so that after the elections, this low official result of the party could be shown to the public as the real share of Russians who are against the war, like, look, here it is. There are very few of them. Well, in the last elections, this party got less than 2%. And the idea might have been, let's allow them to run in the elections, give them 1.5% of the vote and say, look, you had a choice, Russians. You could have voted for the party against the war, but there were only 1.5%, 2, maybe 3% of you. This could be presented as, well, listen, actually everyone is for the war. And then there's the third version. The leader of this party, Yavlinsky, actually has a long-standing personal agreement with Vladimir Putin. The party was allowed to participate in the elections back in 2021, and up until recently, they were still being allowed. And all the criminal pressure on specific activists. This, mind you, is a way to remove from the campaign people who are known outside the party itself, but not to touch the party list, not to touch the leaders. And this third version is the one I believe in the most. Now let me explain. If we look at everything that's happening from the point of view of political science and political technology, then the essence of elections in autocracies is always an exercise in loyalty. These are not real elections. Elections in an autocracy or a dictatorship, it's what's called facade democracy, when only the appearance of democracy exists, like we have elections, we have a parliament. But in reality, none of this exists in Russia, not at all. Exactly, but any elections are an exercise in loyalty. The Kremlin closely monitors who and how supports parties like Yabloko, which supposedly oppose the war. In other words, allowing Yabloko to participate in the elections was necessary until the very last moment in order to publicly flog this anti-war opposition in front of everyone. Like, look what will happen to anyone who goes against the war, against the crazed Vladimir Putin. And this is the most interesting part. Look, the Yabloko party was created, which openly speaks out against the war in the country, in a country where you couldn't call the special military operation a war, otherwise you could end up in prison. In a country where you can't say a word against the war, otherwise you'll be imprisoned. Unfortunately, there are people in Russia who naively believed and joined this party, truly believing that this is really an anti-war party, like this is really the Yabloko party which stands against the war, so let me join them. And so what I was hiding inside and was afraid to speak out about, I'll join the party and there will be many of us and we'll show this Putin that we are actually against the war. But now look at what happens. According to the party itself, at the start of the election campaign, 12 members of Yabloko became defendants in criminal cases. 8 are in colonies and pre-trial detention centers. One of the journalists, Mikhail Afanasyev, who decided to join this Yabloko party, received 5.5 years for an article about law enforcement officers refusing to go to war. The deputy chairman of the party, Maxim Kruglov, received 7 years for 2 posts about civilians killed in Bucha and Mariupol, Ukraine. Turkic activist Vasily Nustroyev received 10 years in a case involving a movement he reportedly wasn't even a member of, and so on. And the list is quite long. Here's the point. How do you identify an opponent of the regime when the dictatorship is already so established that people are afraid to publicly express their views, for example? How do you find those in society who are against your war, who could really undermine your power, but for now they only whisper at home that they are against the war? So how? That's easy. Create a party that pretends to be against the war. Let its leader have the opportunity to publicly say that he is against the war, against Putin. How could Putin even dare to wage such a war? This is a crime, and so on. Real opponents of the war will start joining this party. And then it will be easier to catch them and send them to prison. Therefore, in my subjective opinion, the Yabloko party has fulfilled its mission. That's it. It can be disbanded. It's no longer needed. Although it should be admitted that there is a small group of people in Russia who are truly against the war, simply because this war has started to affect them personally. Well, now let's sum up this whole spectacle. In a country that calls itself a democracy, with elections and a parliament, the only party that openly advocates for ending the war was simply removed from the ballot, because of an unverified copyright claim by an unnamed American soldier to a photo of Hiroshima from 80 years ago, that's all. That's it. The case was reviewed by a judge whose track record consists of shutting down opposition parties. He's done this more than once, so he didn't care at all about any arguments. For him, it was just white noise. At the same time as this cynical judicial circus, real party members are getting real years in real prison colonies for real posts about Bucha and Mariupol. They took the bait. This is the portrait of elections under a dictatorship. A show with the illusion of competition, where it's known in advance who will lose and why. Besides, it's also convenient to keep the so-called anti-war party under control so that a real anti-war party doesn't emerge. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. If you want to support the work of this YouTube channel, I would be grateful. You can do this by donating through the links and details in the description of this video. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.
If anyone has something to say, I invite you to speak. First of all, if that's not the case, there's no need to mention it. and because of that, to hold you up, young people, on your vacation.